For 28 years, my family called me the slow one. They said it at dinner tables, in front of relatives, in the casual tone people use when they've decided something is simply true. My sister Miranda collected Harvard degrees and inheritance promises, while I made copies and fetched coffee in the building that bore our family name. But on the night my father stood in front of 350 people and announced that I would receive nothing, a stranger walked across the room, handed me an envelope, and changed everything. What was inside that envelope would bring down the empire my father thought he owned. What he didn't know was that my grandmother had been watching the whole time. She saw everything. And she had spent the last years of her life making sure I would be ready when the moment came. The Whitfords were Manhattan old money. The kind of family whose name appears on hospital wings and museum plaques. My father, Gerald, ran Whitford Properties, a commercial real estate empire that my grandmother Eleanor had built from a single office in Brooklyn in 1965. By 2020, for the company, was valued at $92 million. I was born with dyslexia, diagnosed at 7. Letters on a page seemed to swim and rearrange themselves into puzzles that took me 3 times as long to solve as any other child. My parents' response was not support. It was shame. By the time I was 12, they had hired private tutors for Miranda's Juilliard violin lessons, enrolled her in French investment courses, and paid a Princeton graduate $400 an hour to prepare her for elite college admissions. When I asked if someone could help me with my reading, my mother Priscilla sighed in the particular way she reserved for problems she had already decided were permanent. Dulce, we've already spent so much on specialists. At some point we have to accept that some children simply aren't built for academics. I was 12 years old. I believed her. So I learned to adapt on my own. Audiobooks became my lifeline. I developed a system of visual notes, diagrams, flowcharts, color-coded maps that let me process information in ways that traditional reading blocked. And every Sunday afternoon, I took the train to my grandmother Eleanor's apartment on the Upper West Side, where she would sit with me for hours and explain everything through stories instead of textbooks. Dulce, she said to me once, covering my hand with hers, the skin paper-thin but the grip surprisingly firm. You read slower than most people, but you see things that most people walk right past. That's not a disability, sweetheart. That's a different kind of vision. I didn't fully understand what she meant then. I would spend the next 16 years figuring it out. Christmas of 2018. 20 relatives gathered around the mahogany table in my parents' Upper East Side home. Crystal candelabras. A catered dinner. The annual performance of Whitford Family Perfection. My father stood at the head of the table with his champagne glass raised, wearing that board meeting authority, like a second skin. I'd like to make an announcement. My daughter Miranda has been accepted to Harvard Law School on a full scholarship. The room erupted. Applause, cheers, my Aunt Catherine pressing a napkin to her eyes. Miranda flushed with a practiced modesty that I had watched her perfect over years. My father beamed. She will be the first Whitford to attend Harvard in 3 generations. She will carry this family and this company to extraordinary heights. More applause. Then his gaze traveled down the table until it landed on me. The warmth in his voice evaporated in an instant, like breath on cold glass. And Dulce is here too. A few relatives laughed. Soft, uncomfortable sounds, the kind people make when they don't know what else to do. Miranda laughed with them. I stared at my plate. The roast lamb went blurry at the edges. Under the table, a hand found mine. Paper-thin fingers. My grandmother Eleanor, sitting across from me, squeezed gently. When I looked up, her eyes held something fierce. Something that looked almost like fury directed at her own son. She didn't say anything. Not that night. But 3 months later, she called me to her apartment and said she needed to show me something important. I didn't know it then. But that Christmas dinner, that single moment of cruelty in front of 20 witnesses, had set something in motion. Something that would take 5 years to fully detonate. After I graduated from a state university in 2022, not an elite institution, never an elite institution, I applied for a position at Whitford Properties. I wanted to prove I could contribute. I wanted to find my place inside something that shared my blood. My father agreed to hire me as an administrative assistant at $42,000 a year. That same month, Miranda joined as director of legal affairs. Her salary was $280,000 plus bonuses. My job consisted of photocopying documents, reserving conference rooms, and bringing coffee to executives who never bothered to learn my name. I was never invited to a single meeting. I was never shown a single contract. But I watched. And I listened. I discovered something about myself during those long hours in the copy room. I could detect patterns that other people ignored. When executives discussed deals in the hallway, I drew diagrams of the relationships between parties, the flow of money, the points of structural weakness. The skill I had developed to compensate for my reading difficulties had quietly become something else entirely. Something my grandmother had been trying to name for years. In April of 2019, she called me to her apartment. She was 82. Her body had grown fragile, her silver hair thin against the cushion of her chair. But her eyes, those sharp, assessing eyes, had not dimmed at all. "Sit down, Dulce." I sat across from her in the room where we had spent so many Sunday afternoons. The walls were covered in photographs. Eleanor breaking ground on her first Brooklyn property in 1965. Eleanor shaking hands with the mayor. Not a single photograph of my father at the helm. "I built Whitford Properties from nothing," she said, her voice carrying decades of quiet steel. "One office, one secretary, 60 years of work. Your father inherited it. He didn't build it. He doesn't understand what it means to create something from the ground up." She paused, and something bitter crossed her face. "He judges people by their credentials, their titles, their ability to perform in boardrooms. I judge people by how they treat those who can't protect themselves. And you're the only person in this family who understands what kindness actually costs." She placed a small mahogany box in my hands. "Brass hinges. Heavier than it looked. There's something inside that might help you one day. But not yet. You're not ready. And neither is Gerald." Her grip tightened. "When the moment comes, when he shows you exactly who he is, you'll know what to do." I wanted to ask what she meant, what was inside, why she had chosen me. But she changed the subject and started talking about the weather and her garden and a book she was reading, and I understood that the conversation was over. 18 months later, she was gone. Pancreatic cancer. I held her hand in the hospice, the only family member there. The box stayed closed in my closet. April of 2024. I came home from a long shift to find a new email in my inbox. Subject line: confidential, position restructuring. The language was corporate and clean and devastating. My position was being eliminated, effective July 1st. HR would be in touch regarding severance options. I read it 3 times. The letters swam the way they always did when I was exhausted, rearranging themselves before settling into the same message. They were firing me. That night I stayed late organizing files no one would ever look at. Through the thin wall between my cubicle and my father's office, I heard voices. "Gerald and Priscilla. We can't have her here when Miranda takes over," my father said. "It looks bad. The CEO's sister working as a secretary. People will ask questions. Why isn't she in leadership? Why haven't we promoted her? Why is she the way she is?" My mother's response was soft, almost gentle. "We've done everything we could for her, Gerald. Some children simply don't have what it takes." "Exactly. So she has to go. We'll give her a generous severance. She'll find something more suited to her abilities." I pressed my palm flat against the wall. $42,000 a year. My studio apartment in Queens, shared with 2 roommates, cost $1,800 a month. No savings. No safety net. If I lost this job, I would be on the street within 2 months. But the money wasn't what was pressing against my chest. It was the understanding settling into my bones like cold air. If I let this happen, if I accepted their version of who I was, I would spend the rest of my life as the family's failure. Not because I had actually failed, but because they had never once given me the conditions to succeed. The next evening was Miranda's graduation party. I went to my closet and took out the mahogany box. May 15th, 2024. The Plaza Hotel Grand Ballroom. 350 guests in a golden room. Business partners, investors, attorneys from prestigious firms, distant relatives I barely recognized. Crystal chandeliers throwing fractured light over silk tablecloths. An orchestra in the corner playing something classical and expensive. I arrived in a $90 black dress, the best I could afford on my salary. Everyone else glittered with designer labels. My mother intercepted me near the entrance, her gaze moving from my pharmacy brand makeup to my worn shoes, her lips pressing together in that familiar expression of quiet disapproval. Couldn't you find something better? This is what I have. She adjusted her Cartier bracelet. You're at table 27, near the service entrance. Please try not to draw attention to yourself. This is Miranda's night. Whatever you're feeling, whatever resentment you think you're entitled to, keep it to yourself. Don't embarrass us. She walked away before I could respond. Table 27 was at the back of the room, partially hidden behind a column. I could see the main stage from my seat. An enormous portrait of Miranda in her Harvard graduation robes hung above it, lit from below. Near the entrance, standing alone and not socializing, was a man with silver hair and a gray suit. He wasn't eating. He wasn't talking. He was simply watching the room with the careful stillness of someone who has spent a lifetime in courtrooms. His eyes found mine across the crowd. A cold current moved through me. At 8:30, the orchestra stopped. Lights dimmed. A spotlight found my father at the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us to celebrate a truly extraordinary young woman. Applause before he finished the sentence. Miranda graduated in the top 5% of her Harvard class. She completed a clerkship with a federal judge. Last month, she was fast-tracked toward partnership at one of the country's most prestigious firms. His voice swelled with pride. I had watched him give away to everyone except me my entire life. But tonight, we don't only celebrate her accomplishments. Tonight, I make an announcement. He paused for effect. Effective immediately, Miranda will inherit my entire estate upon my death. This includes our Park Avenue residence, valued at $13 million. Our other holdings. And most importantly, another pause longer, savoring it, the CEO position at Whitford Properties when I retire. The room erupted. A standing ovation. Camera flashes. Miranda dabbed her eyes with theatrical grace. 350 people celebrating. Not one of them looked toward table 27. The cousin sitting next to me, someone I had seen perhaps twice in my life, at funerals, leaned over. Dulce, right? So, what does that mean for you? I opened my mouth, closed it. What could I possibly say? That I had just been formally erased from my own family in front of everyone who mattered? That the termination letter in my inbox was only the beginning? The applause was still echoing when the silver-haired man began walking toward me with deliberate, unhurried steps. He stopped at my table. Miss Whitford. I apologize for the setting. I sat up straighter. Can I help you? My name is Jonathan Ellis. He produced a card from his breast pocket. Morrison and Blake, attorneys at law. He placed it on the tablecloth in front of me. I was your grandmother's personal attorney. She left something for you with very specific instructions about when to deliver it. From inside his jacket, he withdrew a cream-colored envelope sealed in dark red wax with a notary stamp. What is this? Her will. The real one. The one your father doesn't know exists. I stared at the seal. The date pressed into the wax read September 12th, 2019. 5 months after that afternoon in her apartment. 5 months after she had placed the mahogany box in my hands and told me I would know when the time came. I don't understand. Your grandmother left me explicit instructions. I was to deliver this document on the day your father publicly disinherited you. He straightened slightly. I believe that has just occurred. My hands were shaking when I took the envelope. Mr. Ellis. What's inside? For the first time, something warm entered his expression. She told me to say, give this to Dulce on the day Gerald shows her exactly who he is. By then, she'll be ready. He adjusted his tie. I'll be available when you have questions. You have my card. He turned and disappeared into the crowd. I could not breathe in that ballroom. I walked out through the service entrance and found an empty corridor near the kitchen. Fluorescent lights. The sounds of the party arriving like a distant echo. My fingers trembled as I broke the wax seal. 3 pages of dense legal text. A notarized signature. I read slowly, the way I always read, carefully, with complete attention, forcing the letters to hold still. I, Eleanor Margaret Whitford, being of sound mind and full faculty, hereby revoke all prior testamentary documents and declare this my last will and testament. My eyes stopped at a paragraph halfway down the second page. To my granddaughter Dulce and Whitford, I bequeath 51% of my shares in Whitford Properties LLC, currently valued at approximately $47 million, along with all associated voting rights. I read it again. And again. 51%. The controlling interest. The will continued. This bequest is made with full knowledge of my son Gerald's treatment of Dulce. She has been excluded, diminished, and denied opportunity, not due to lack of ability, but due to lack of support. Dulce is not slow. Dulce was abandoned. I will not allow her father's prejudices to outlast me. A sound escaped me before I could stop it. My grandmother had seen everything, and she had spent the last years of her life building a net beneath me for the moment I finally fell. There was a condition. To activate the inheritance, I had to formally request an emergency board meeting within 72 hours of receiving the document. Failure to meet that deadline would void the will entirely. 72 hours. The deadline expired at 8:30 p.m. on May 18th. I leaned against the cold wall with the document pressed against my chest. My grandmother had given me a weapon. Now I had to decide if I was brave enough to use it. That night in my queen's apartment, I finally opened the mahogany box. My roommates were asleep. The only light came from the street lamp outside, throwing orange stripes across my bed. The brass hinges protested softly as the lid lifted. Inside, a handwritten letter, a document from 1965 with a worn date stamp, and a modern USB drive. I took the letter first. My dear Dulce, if you're reading this, Jonathan has done his job, and your father has done exactly what I feared. The attached document is the original 1965 partnership agreement. Your father has never seen it. It establishes that founder shares carry permanent voting rights that cannot be diluted without board approval. The USB contains something more. Something your father believed I had forgotten. I connected the drive. The file was labeled Board Meeting Minutes, March 2018. I pressed play. My father's voice filled the room. Eleanor is 81 years old. She no longer understands modern business. I'm proposing we reduce her voting rights from 51% to 10%. This is for the good of the company. I sat completely still. He had tried to strip his own mother of everything she had built, using her age as the excuse. The board had rejected the proposal by 2 votes. One of them was Eleanor's. The other was a board member named Margaret Coleman. My grandmother had recorded it. She had kept it, and she had given it to me. I called Jonathan Ellis's personal number at 7 the next morning. I want to request that meeting. I reached Margaret Coleman that same afternoon. 72 years old. Silver-haired. The kind of authority that comes from building things with your own hands. Dulce Whitford, she said when I introduced myself. Your grandmother talked about you constantly. A pause. She also told me about the will before she died. So, I know what you're considering. Can you help me find the votes I need? I can do better than that. Gerald's management style has made enemies on that board. At least 4 members have expressed concerns privately. They just need someone to go first. She paused again. Understand something. This will not be pleasant. Your father will fight. Your sister will fight. They will say terrible things about you. They've been saying terrible things my entire life, I said. Asterisk, at least now I'll be.